Hi, welcome to another edition of Fleet Momentum video series. I'm Chris Brown, Associate Publisher of Automotive Fleet. This series is designed to put a spotlight on key leaders, trends, and product offerings in the fleet management industry. This edition is sponsored by and produced in partnership with Cardata. Today, I connect with Lee Adam, Director of Product Marketing for Cardata. Lee and I discuss scenarios where providing a fleet vehicle isn't always the preferred choice. We discuss options for reimbursement and common approaches to mixed vehicle programs. But before we begin, remember to follow and connect with us on social media, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes of Fleet Momentum. Well, we're here with Lee Adam, Director of Product Marketing for Cardata. Welcome, Lee.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
Well, let's dive right into the questions. First question. So, in what circumstances does it make sense to evaluate alternatives to a fleet vehicle, such as a reimbursement program?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that's very top of mind right now. Fleet managers have already started to pivot from more asset-focused, safety management-focused roles to complete mobility strategists. So I'll start by prefacing with the fact that nowadays it's really important to always be thinking about modern mobility strategies and what that looks like for your company. But especially now with the rise of employee choice and the demand for flexibility, it's a good time to consider it. I will say that the first step, however, is to take a closer look at your current fleet setup and ask yourself, who needs a vehicle? What type of vehicles do they need? When do they need it? And why does a company-provided vehicle make the most sense for their role? And of course, as you and I both know, there's going to be times where company vehicles are, of course, the best fit, right? Heavy, commercial vehicles, rigged trucks, branded vehicles, right? But if the answer to the questions are, I don't know, then a couple signs that it might be time to evaluate alternatives are things like, high corporate risk and liability. So a recent accident that impacted insurability, rising costs for purchasing and maintaining vehicles with downward financial pressure. And if your traditional fleet only model is struggling to keep pace with some of your company's growth, that's when it's really time to look at some alternatives and discuss whether it's time to make a change.
We talk about a mixed vehicle program. So what is it actually? And then if you can get into the primary benefits of integrating a reimbursement option into an overall fleet strategy.
Yeah, so a mixed program typically means combining traditional company vehicles with a reimbursement option, which gives employees more flexibility in how they get around for work. So this allows certain people to use their personal vehicle for work and receive a fair, competitive reimbursement for doing so. So in terms of benefits of doing that, a mixed approach really allows businesses to leverage personal vehicles and give fleet managers the ability to have better cost and liability controls in place. So on average, company vehicles are traditionally 25 to 30% more expensive to manage than even an outsourced vehicle reimbursement alternative. And this is typically because reimbursement simply pays for business required expenses without taking on any additional personal use payments or liability concerns. So no more unexpected big ticket expenses for maintenance or accidents, no more increased insurance premiums or guesswork as to what costs are actually related to work. And then, of course, in addition to this, by offering reimbursement, businesses become more flexible to support their growth, which minimizes things like disruptions when there's issues with vehicle availability, right? So, of course, this is why tax-free competitive alternatives exist in the space.
So what are the options or essentially common approaches to these mixed programs?
Yeah, another great question. And, I will note every company functions differently. So depending on things like territory size, employee driving needs, success metrics, whatever the pressures look like for the fleet manager, there really isn't one size fits all approach. But to maximize your program's efficiencies, it is important to choose a program or a group of programs that really mirror employee behaviors. And there are three main reimbursement methods that are recognized by the IRS, specifically in the United States today. Although they are managed slightly differently. And of course, the fit is going to depend on your real employees' needs. So Number one is cents per mile reimbursement. That's your typical mileage reimbursement, right? So ideal for really low mileage drivers, perhaps under 5,000 miles per year is the typical here. And often you're leveraging the IRS standard rate. You're driving, you're just, racking miles on. You get paid when you're on the road. Very, very simple. Other approaches like tax-free or accountable car allowance are a flat allowance approach that can actually be 100% rather tax-free on driving mileage. And it's really good when you're trying to set a rate or want to reimburse executives for their use of their vehicle on the road. But finally, the most common approach specifically for fleet transitions is going to be favor or fixed and variable rate reimbursement. So combining a fixed allowance with a per mile reimbursement to cover both the business use of ownership costs and the business use of operating costs. And you can do that 100% free, calculated, 100% tax-free, calculated based on the actual required cost of driving for the role in somebody's specific area. So it's really attractive for a lot of employees.
So how can fleets evaluate essentially the effectiveness of a reimbursement program? I mean, once it's implemented, and what are the metrics that you want to monitor?
Yeah, great question. And it's important to do this, right? Just as we evaluate our fleets for things like cost of ownership, we need to really be evaluating our reimbursement programs too. They're also strategic. Now, business reviews with your program manager, if you're using a vehicle reimbursement provider, are going to be really important. You're going to look at things like measuring against your KPIs, performance relative to what you've set as your goals. You want to look at your vehicle profiles and determine whether there's been any adjustments to state regulations that you want to mirror in your tax-free program and adjust vehicle policies. But in terms of actually the metrics that you should measure, some really common ones include spend to date versus last year. Like, did you save money? Were you able to find those optimizations, right? One to one. The other elements to consider are tax savings, right? So how many people were compliant for tax? Do you need to make adjustments there? There's also elements like minimum mileage for qualifications and trending mileage. Is somebody driving less than anticipated? Should they be in a different program and be reimbursed differently, right? And of course, things like industry position versus competitors or peers in the space. So do you want to be a little bit more lean or a little bit more rich? And when you're working with a strategic partner, you don't have to exist in the dark. You can really build programs that help mirror the goals of your organization.
Last question, Lee. What does success look like? I mean, and how do you measure it?
It's funny because success can look different for every company, and it does, and it should, depending on the goals of that company at the specific time in which they're adjusting their reimbursement model and also their drivers. For some, it's cost savings, net cost savings. For others, it's driver satisfaction and increasing flexibility and making the transition from a fleet-only approach as smooth as possible. And for some, it's simply managing liability and increasing their ability to avoid having insurance issues or accidents, right? And for a lot of companies, it's everything I mentioned all in one. So it's really about balancing all of these things together. And I'll share an anecdote. One customer came to us and they were looking to move away from their old reimbursement provider, right? So they were just looking at people who were already in personal vehicles. And despite this being their initial focus, we built a custom reimbursement plan for them that mirrored their people's needs, was tax-free, and it gave their people more options. The cool part in doing that is they actually ended up giving these individuals who were in fleet vehicles where they didn't necessarily need to be, to those things I mentioned earlier, right? Their job didn't need it. Maybe it was more of a cost element, wasn't a huge benefit. The option to switch, and 60% of eligible drivers actually chose to switch to reimbursement. Wow. So with all that being said, it's a really interesting time to explore reimbursement.
Well, some great facts laid out here on reimbursement program and what a strategy looks like. Lee, thanks for being on this episode of Fleet Momentum Series.
Thanks, Chris.